Hi, my name's Chris Bowe. I'm a regional intelligence analyst here at Intelligence Fusion, and today we're going to be talking about the upcoming midterm elections in the US. So midterm elections are held every 4 years, and they're held between presidential elections. Although they are purely a legislative election, so it's for electing members to the House of Representatives, who have 2-year terms, so they're voted in every 2 years, as well as 1/3 of all senators who hold 6-year terms of office and therefore are elected on a rotational basis. So when trying to sum up the current state of US politics, the key thing is how everything seems to be on a knife edge at the moment. The Democrats have 222 members in the House of Representatives, which is only 9 more than the Republicans. I think it's a very narrow margin of control. While the Senate is literally a 50-50 split between 48 Democrat senators with support for 2 independents versus 50 Republican senators. In fact, the Democrats only are deemed the majority party due to the tie-break powers of Vice President Kamala Harris, who's a Democrat. So trying to find the defining issues of these midterm elections, the most significant thing at the moment is the fact that over 80% of Americans in a recent poll said they were unsatisfied with how the United States was and sort of the state of the nation. And sort of key issues that were raised included things such as abortion issues. So recently in the news, it's become sort of very well known about how the previous Supreme Court decision, Roe versus Wade, which gave protection to abortion rights across the country, is potentially going to be overturned due to Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is an upcoming decision that Supreme Court's meant to respond to by sort of the end of June, beginning of July. And according to a leaked verdict of the case, it would see Roe versus Wade being overturned. And as such, individual states would have the right to decree whether abortion would be legal or not. And around 20 states have already said that they would severely cut down on the availability of abortion services. So as such, that's already sparked quite a few protests from both pro-life and pro-choice groups, and will likely be a defining factor as for while Congress could pass legislation, at the moment they've been unable to due to how closely divided the Senate is. So that will be a big issue going forward in campaigning in some of the states, trying to get voters who sit on either pro-life or pro-choice sides and trying to get them to vote for various parties. Looking at sort of foreign affairs, big issues are, of course, the war in Ukraine and President Joe Biden's handling of it. And while only sort of around 14% of Americans reckon that Joe Biden has gone too far, there's a lot of people who say that either he's sort of issuing the right amount of help to Ukraine or should go further. So there's actually quite a large amount of support for further sanctions on Russia, further military aid being sent to Ukraine, and especially further humanitarian aid being sent to Ukraine. So this could, depending on how long the war lasts, have significant impact on the election. I think, though, the most defining issue, especially at the moment, seems to be the economy. So obviously with the war in Ukraine and sort of the aftermath of COVID, countries around the Western world are suffering from economic downturn. So that could be seen as not necessarily being sort of the fault of the Democrat Party, but because they are in control of both the presidency and both chambers of Congress, is something that is a liability for their electoral record. And main issues at the moment are things such as high fuel prices, which obviously is a knock-on effect of the war in Ukraine, but other things such as high rates of inflation and shortages of essentials such as baby food, which will likely be brought up by Republican opponents as a way of showing that the Democrat Party haven't been handling the economy well. But as it's still about half a year until the elections are held, there's always room for new issues to appear and sort of spontaneous issues. So with recent mass shootings in Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas, things such as gun control are starting to become much more apparent as issues that could become significant in the election. Again, with Democrats being more seen as being pro-gun control, while Republicans are very pro-Second Amendment, and quite a few Republican-controlled states have been introducing laws that make it easier to have concealed carry permits, and they don't want to sort of restrict access to firearms. So it's 20 Republican seats, or seats currently held by the Republican Party, that are available for re-election, as well as 14 Democrat-controlled seats. And most of these are, as I was saying earlier, deemed safe seats. So you have states such as Alabama, which are very Republican-leaning, and it would be remarkable if a Democrat won, and the same with California, but with the Democrats being in control and Republicans not really having a chance of winning it. So as such, you can actually narrow it down to about 5 key battleground states. And these are Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So trying to break these down, Arizona and Georgia are in fact very similar in the sense that both voted in 2016 for Donald Trump in the presidential election, and they both also voted in Republican senators. So the bunch of senators being re-elected now were a lot who were first elected in 2016. However, both these states then voted for Democratic President Joe Biden in the 2020 election, and both these states also had special elections in 2020, and that was due to the death of Arizona's Senator John McCain and the retirement of one of the senators from Georgia. And in 2020, Democratic senators were elected to these positions. So as such, while the states are traditionally seen as being Republican-leaning, the fact that in 2020 both voted for Democratic presidential candidate and Democratic senators mean that they're now seen as being a quite significant battleground state, which could go either way. And obviously even just a change of 2 senators would have a major impact in the state of the Senate due to it being a 50-50 split. Nevada, meanwhile, would appear initially to be sort of Democrat-leaning. It voted for Democratic presidential candidates in 2016 and 2020, and it's had a Democratic senator elected since 2016. However, it's often deemed to be what's called a bellwether state in regards to the fact it's fairly representative of sort of the United States as a whole in regards to its demographics and the fact that it's sort of a roughly 50-50 split between Democrat and Republican voters. So again, that's a key battleground state to see, and as a way of sort of summarising how Americans are feeling in general in regards to which political party they're leaning to support. Finally, looking at Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they were quite interesting in the fact that in 2012 they'd voted for Obama in the presidential elections. In 2016 they flipped to the Republican Party and voted for Trump, and then in 2020 back to the Democrats with Joe Biden. So you can see there seems to be a bit of a split between Republican and Democrat. However, they've had Republican senators. 2 senators there were first elected in 2010. So because of this split between sort of voting for Democratic presidential candidate and yet having Republican senators, it's seen as another battleground state where either party could win. And as such, those 2 seats would, again, have quite a big impact on the state of the Senate. So I think it's quite a valid concern about whether there's the possibility of violence akin to what was seen during the 2020 election of re-emerging. I think, in short, it's unlikely that you're going to have that kind of violence due to 3 factors. First of which is apathy. So midterm elections have lower turnouts than presidential elections. And one of the main reasons for this is because there's no real central figures for either party. But it means, unlike presidential elections, and specifically ones like 2020, where you have key figures to rally around, you don't really have that in midterms. So it's unlikely that sort of vast numbers of voters will be mobilised under the ideological leanings of a single figure. And along that line of thought is the third point, which is about Donald Trump. And in fact, there's signs that Donald Trump's control over the Republican Party is starting to wane. So recently, at the moment, there's the primaries going on, which is where the parties pick which candidates are going to stand in the seats for the House of Representatives, the Senate, sort of gubernatorial elections. So a very pro-Trump representative, Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina, recently lost in his primary against a more moderate Republican. And similarly in Georgia, the gubernatorial candidate, David Perdue, who was a Trump-supported candidate, has lost against the incumbent governor, Brian Kemp. And Brian Kemp became quite famous in 2020 due to his sort of standoff against Trump when Trump accused Georgia of having vote rigging and sort of election malpractice. So with these 2 cases, while only it's 2 cases, it does appear to show that Donald Trump's control over Republican Party is waning, and that, as such, it's less likely that he'd want to sort of mobilise voters in the event of a Republican defeat. However, there is still the chance for violence due to a couple of issues. So one, as mentioned earlier, is abortion. Now, abortion is probably the most ideological issue that sort of is at the forefront of this coming election. And there are some ways in which you can see it as sort of being comparable to 2020. So broadly, you have the pro-life groups, which are seen as being conservative, and the pro-choice groups, which are seen as being liberal. And already we've seen big protest movements from both sides due to the chance of abortion laws being changed in the United States. And it is possible that these could become violent or that it would cause mass disruption. I think sort of the political atmosphere overall in the United States has become more peaceful and a lot less aggressive. And I think a major part of that is due to COVID no longer really being at the forefront. So with COVID, it became a very ideological issue, and things such as lockdowns and mask mandates, instead of being matters of public health policy, instead became intrinsically ideological and became issues of freedom versus control, sort of state versus federal control over the country. And now that issue has been largely resolved, I think there is much less of a sort of violent ideological divide between voters. And again, other than sort of the issue of abortion, I don't think there's any sort of real rallying point for sort of violent fringe groups to really centre on. So overall, I don't think you are likely to get the kind of violence that you saw in 2020 recur in the 2022 midterms. Thank you for watching this episode of The Insight. If you liked our content, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel.